The night glittered with opulence. Inside the 52nd floor ballroom of the Zafar Global Tower, crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain, scattering light over polished marble floors. The panoramic glass walls displayed a breathtaking view of the city skyline, where skyscrapers shimmered under the moonlight. Waiters in black tuxedos glided between guests, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Their polished shoes clicking softly on the floor, Sana adjusted the soft folds of her emerald green gown, one hand resting protectively over the gentle curve of her belly. At 7 months pregnant, she had chosen the dress for its understated elegance, wanting to remain in the background. This was Rayan's night, or so she thought. The invitation had read Annual Zafar Foundation Charity Gala, an event the couple had hosted together for years. But this year, something felt different, almost staged. Rayan Zafar, her husband, was in his element. The billionaire CEO had always known how to command a room, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit and wearing that easy smile that could charm investors, politicians, and journalists alike. Cameras followed his every move as he mingled effortlessly with dignitaries and celebrities. And then she saw her Hania Khan, draped in a silk champagne gown that clung to her every curve. Glittering diamond earrings swaying as she laughed at something Rayan had whispered. Her manicured hand rested casually on his forearm in a way that was far too familiar. The mistress, Sana, had known about her for months, a shadow lingering in their marriage. But never before had Rayan dared to parade her in public. Tonight, he wasn't hiding it, he was flaunting it. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC's voice rang out. Please take your seats for the highlight of the evening hour keynote speech by Mr. Rayan Zafar. Applause erupted. Sana instinctively began moving toward the stage, ready to take her usual place beside her husband. For years they had stood together during these speeches, presenting themselves as a united force. It was their tradition, their unspoken way, of telling the world that the Zafar Empire was as much hers as his. But as she approached, Rayan's eyes flicked toward her cold warning. He extended an arm, not toward her, but toward Hania. Come, Hania, he said smoothly, his voice loud enough to be caught by nearby microphones. You should be the one up here. You're the real woman behind my success. The words sliced through Sana like glass. She froze, unsure if she had heard correctly. Her stomach tightened, not from the baby's movement this time, but from the sharp sting of humiliation. She stepped forward, but Rayan's hand came up, not gently, not discreetly, but with a firm, dismissive push to her shoulder. The force wasn't enough to knock her down, but it was enough to send her stumbling back a step, her heels scraping against the marble. Gasps rippled through the audience, cameras flashed, capturing every angle. Sana's widened eyes, the hand on her belly, the shadow of pain she tried to mask somewhere. A videographer zoomed in, catching the exact moment Rayan turned his back on her to escort Hania onto the stage. Hania's smile was triumphant, dripping with silent mockery. She leaned into the microphone, thanking the incredible man who had made all her dreams possible. Every word was a nail in Sana's chest. Sana felt the world around her muffle as though she were underwater. She could still see the crowd, clapping, hear the echo of Rayan's laughter, but it was distant, distorted. Inside something shifted, something colder, sharper. Her shock hardened into silent rage, the kind that didn't burn hot but froze, promising calculation. She didn't speak, she didn't cry. She simply turned, walking back toward the shadows of the ballroom. Yet even there, she couldn't escape the glare of the cameras. Dozens of lenses had already captured her humiliated expression, her pregnant figure standing alone while her husband celebrated another woman by the next morning. Those images would be everywhere, splashed across celebrity blogs, trending on social media, dissected on talk shows. The caption would vary, but the essence would be the same. Billionaire pushes pregnant wife aside for mistress at charity gala. Sana didn't know it yet, but this very moment, immortalized in millions of pixels, would become the spark that ignited the war. The humiliation at the gala was only the latest fracture in a marriage that had been splintering for years. In the quiet of her apartment later that night, Sana sat by the window, the city's glittering lights blurred by her unshed tears. Her mind wandered back before the skyscrapers, the black tie galas, the billionaire headlines, to a small, dimly lit coffee shop where it had all begun. Rayan hadn't been a billionaire then. He was a young man with restless eyes and big dreams, working on a startup idea that seemed more fantasy than feasible. His hair was a little too long, his suit a little too cheap, but his words were fire. He spoke about innovation and disruption, about building something that would outlast them both. Sana had been drawn to that fire. She was fresh out of business school, armed with her own ambitions, but she found herself captivated by his vision. Their early days were full of late nights spent over laptops, takeout boxes scattered between stacks of papers. She sketched business plans while he pitched to skeptical investors. She was the strategist, he was the face. Together, they were unstoppable. When his company finally got its first major investor, it was Sana who had secured the meeting quietly, without asking for credit. She had pushed her own career offers aside to focus on him, telling herself it was temporary, that her time would come. and for a while it seemed worth it. They celebrated milestones like they were personal victories, a new office, the first million, then the 10th. They moved from a one-bedroom apartment to a penthouse in the heart of the city. He promised her the world, swore they'd always be a team. But success changes people, or maybe it simply reveals them. Rayan began to move in different circles. Boardrooms replaced their kitchen table strategy sessions. His phone became a constant companion, his smiles more rehearsed. Somewhere along the way, Hania entered the picture. She was young, glamorous, and perfectly tailored to the new world Rayan inhabited. It started subtly. Her name dropped in passing, her presence at corporate events. Then it became blatant. Hania's opinions began to outweigh Sanaa's. Rayan, once confident in their partnership, started questioning Sanaa's motives. She doesn't understand the business anymore, Hania would say, her voice dripping with faux concern. She's emotional. Pregnant women can't think clearly about strategy. Worse still, Hania whispered poison into his ear, planting seeds of paranoia. Sanaa's keeping tabs on you, Rayan. She's after your assets. Be careful who you trust. Rayan's glances at Sana grew sharper, his tone colder. Conversations turned into interrogations about her spending, her contacts, her opinions. He locked away documents they used to review together. He began changing passwords. What he didn't realize was that Sana had always noticed more than she let on. She had been there from the first deal to the latest merger. She knew the shadowy corners of the company's growth, of offshore accounts, the creative accounting, the shell corporations tucked away in jurisdictions no one dared to question. Those secrets had been buried deep, hidden behind boardroom doors and encrypted files. Rayan thought only he knew where the bodies were buried. But Sana knew, and the night he pushed her aside for Hania, she began to wonder if those very secrets might one day be her weapon. It came as a whisper, but it felt like a thunderclap. Sana had been sitting at the corner table of a quiet cafe, nursing a cup of mint tea, when Rayan's personal assistant, Farah, slid into the seat across from her. Farah's eyes darted nervously to the door before leaning in. I shouldn't be here, she said, her voice low. If anyone finds out, she swallowed hard. Rayan's meeting with a lawyer. He plans to file for divorce before you give birth. Sanaa's stomach twisted. Before, she asked, her voice little more than a breath. Farah nodded quickly. If the divorce is finalized before the baby is born, you won't have automatic inheritance rights. He's moving assets, changing trust documents. Hania's behind it. She slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies, agreements, dates circled in red, even handwritten notes in Rayan's unmistakable scrawl. Sana stared at the damning papers, her pulse hammering. She had expected betrayal, but not such precision. This wasn't the impulsive cruelty of a man in an affair. This was a calculated erasure. By the time she returned to the penthouse that evening, the air felt heavier. Rayan was already there, standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows with a tumbler of scotch in hand. The city lights framed him like a king surveying his empire. We need to talk, Sana began, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. He didn't turn. We have nothing to talk about. My lawyer will be in touch. Her breath caught. You're really doing this? Before the baby? Rayan turned sharply, his expression iced. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Pack your things. You're leaving tonight. Tonight. He gestured toward the door, and two suited security guards stepped forward. Escort her out, he said flatly. Sanaa's hand went instinctively to her belly. This is my home, she said, the words trembling but firm. Not anymore. His gaze slid past her, as though she were a stranger trespassing in his life. The guards didn't touch her, but their presence was enough. She gathered what she could, a handbag, her phone, a small box of personal papers, and walked out without looking back. But the cruelty didn't end there. 2 days later, she returned to collect the rest of her belongings under the watchful eyes of building staff. Hania was there, lounging on the white leather sofa as if she owned the place. She stood when Sana entered, her smile sweet but venomous. Careful on your way out, Hania said casually, drifting toward the staircase that wound down to the foyer. Sana ignored her, heading toward the study to retrieve her laptop. But as she passed the landing, Hania stepped directly into her path. Oh, sorry, Hania exclaimed. But her elbow caught Sana squarely in the side. The impact was enough to throw her off balance. Her heel slid on the polished step, and for one heart-stopping moment, the world tilted. Sanaa's hands shot out, gripping the banister, her other arm wrapped protectively over her belly. Pain flared in her side as her knees buckled, but she didn't fall. Hania's face flashed something disappointment before she plastered on a mask of innocence. You should really watch your step, especially in your condition. Sanaa's breathing came fast, her vision blurring at the edges. She didn't respond. She simply steadied herself and walked, out each step deliberate. But as she reached the street, the truth hit her like a cold blade. This wasn't just about humiliation or money anymore. They didn't just want her gone. They wanted her, and her baby erased, and if she didn't act soon, they might succeed. The rain was relentless that evening, turning the streets into slick ribbons of reflected neon. Sana wandered without direction, clutching her coat tighter around her. Every step away from the penthouse felt like leaving behind another piece of the life she once knew. By the time she spotted the warm golden glow of the Veritas bookstore and cafe, her feet ached and her hair clung damply to her temples. The shop was a relic from another time, wooden shelves that reached the ceiling, the air heavy with the scent of old paper and cinnamon coffee. Soft jazz hummed in the background. She slipped inside, desperate for warmth and anonymity. She found a corner table tucked behind a row of history books, ordered tea, and tried to calm the storm in her mind. But she wasn't alone for long. A tall man in a dark coat approached, his presence somehow both commanding and unobtrusive. His neatly groomed beard framed a mouth set in a line of careful calculation. "Sena Zafa," he said, pulling out the chair opposite her without waiting for permission. She froze, her hand halfway to her teacup. "Do I know you? A deal more." The name carried weight: venture capitalist, power broker, and, she knew from whispered boardroom rumors, one of Ryan's most persistent competitors. Her guard shot up instantly. "If you're here to talk business, I'm not interested." His eyes, sharp and assessing, softened just slightly. "I'm not here for small talk. I'm here because I know what Ryan is doing. Offshore accounts, shell companies in the Caymans, falsified audit reports." Sena's pulse quickened. "Why are you telling me this?" A faint smile curved his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Because taking him down benefits me. You have access to things I don't. Emails, private files, conversations, and I have the resources to use them." She studied him carefully. He wasn't offering sympathy. He wasn't pretending to be a savior. His offer was calculated, transactional. That honesty, strangely enough, made her trust him more than most. "And what do you get out of this?" she asked. "The satisfaction of watching my biggest competitor fall," he replied smoothly. "And of course, the market share that will be up for grabs once he does." Sana leaned back, her fingers curling protectively over her belly. "If I do this, I'm not your pawn. I decide how the evidence is used. I decide when we strike." Adil inclined his head, as though sealing an unspoken contract. "On your terms, but you'll need to move fast. Ryan isn't the type to leave loose ends. And you, Mrs. Zafar, are a very big loose end." For the first time in weeks, Sana felt a flicker of control returning. She had been humiliated, pushed out, nearly harmed, but now, she had an ally. And if Ryan thought she would disappear quietly, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Sana had always blended into the background of Rayon's world, content to be the quiet power behind his public brilliance. But now, invisibility was a weakness she could no longer afford. The transformation began subtly. Adil arranged for her to meet a discreet personal stylist who specialized in power image rehabilitation. Gone were the pastel maternity dresses and soft cardigans. In their place came tailored coats, structured dresses, and silk blouses that framed her pregnancy not as fragility but as strength. Colors shifted from muted tones to deep emerald, navy, and crimson hues that commanded attention without screaming. "For at every appearance is a message," the stylist told her. "Your job is to make the world wonder why a man would discard a woman like you." Sana took the advice to heart. She began making carefully curated public visits, art gallery openings, even a guest lecture at her former business school. Paparazzi shots of her smiling graciously, her hand resting over her belly, began to circulate online. Hashtags emerged, framing her as the wronged but dignified wife. Public sympathy, once absent, started to tilt in her favor. Behind the scenes, Adil was shaping her into something far more dangerous than a public figure. In a quiet conference room above the bookstore cafe, he drilled her in the tactics of high-stakes negotiation and corporate espionage. Never ask for information directly, he instructed one afternoon, sliding a printed email chain toward her. Make them believe they've told you voluntarily. He played the role of hostile board members, pushing her to defend her position under pressure. At first, Sana stumbled, her voice faltering when he raised his tone. But with each session, she grew sharper. Her responses became more precise. Her composure unshakable. "You've done this before," Adil observed after one particularly brutal mock meeting. She gave a thin smile. "I was Ryan's shadow for years. Every investor pitch, every merger negotiation, he'd look at me, waiting for the slightest nod before making a move. He thought it was instinct. It was me." The flashbacks came unbidden. Late nights in their cramped apartment, Sana rewriting investor decks while Ryan slept. Her quiet corrections during calls when he misstated a figure. The moment she'd talked him out of a disastrous acquisition that would have bankrupted them, she had been the strategist all along. That same meticulous instinct now guided her as she began gathering what she needed to bring him down. Under the guise of collecting personal belongings from the penthouse, she recovered a box she'd hidden years ago in the back of her wardrobe, a battered shoebox containing an old laptop, several USB drives, and a leather-bound notebook. Laptop was slow, its screen faintly cracked, but it contained archived emails, financial spreadsheets, and drafts of contracts that never saw daylight. The USB drives held backups of presentations and confidential documents, some marked with cryptic file names only. She tilted her head, her voice sweet but sharp, irrelevant. when they're holding company funds disguised as private assets. Murmurs erupted around the table. Sana didn't press further. She let the silence do the work. Rayan, irritated and off balance, snapped. Those transfers were necessary to keep the board's bonuses intact, he barked, his voice rising. Without them, we'd have been in violation of. He stopped mid-sentence, realizing too late the weight of what he'd said. Phones buzzed quietly under the table as a few directors exchanged pointed looks. Sana kept her expression neutral, though inside she felt the precise click of a trap closing. What no one in the room knew was that 2 floors below, in an unmarked office suite, Adil's tech team was logged into the company's internal network. They had slipped in using temporary credentials Sana had secured weeks earlier through an overlooked staff portal. The moment Rayan's voice rose in the boardroom, all eyes turned to what no one noticed: a silent exfiltration of terabytes of hidden files, audit reports, encrypted ledgers, email archives. From her seat near the far end of the table, Hania watched Sana closely. At first, she'd worn a smug half-smile, clearly expecting Rayan to throw Sana out, but as the meeting went on, her smile faded. Sana's calm, almost surgical way of speaking was unlike the wounded, humiliated wife Hania had grown used to mocking. When the meeting adjourned, Rayan stormed out without another glance at Sana, but Hania lingered, her gaze lingering on her rival. "You're up to something," she murmured under her breath as she passed, "and I'll find out what it is." Sana only smiled faintly, as if Hania's suspicion was a compliment, because, by the time she did find out, it would already be far too late. The first leak was small, deliberately so, a single, well-placed tip to a respected business columnist about unusual accounting discrepancies in Zafar Global Holdings' quarterly reports. The article didn't name Rayan directly, but it was enough to send whispers through the financial sector. Investors hate uncertainty, and uncertainty has a way of multiplying. Within a week, Sana sent another unanonymous packet of internal emails hinting at irregular offshore transfers. This time the journalist was bolder, naming high-ranking executives and suggesting a culture of questionable ethics at the company. The stock dipped by 2% overnight. From her vantage point in Adil's office, Sana watched the chaos unfold. Through news feeds, Rayan's face appeared on the business channels, his polished smile pulled tight, dismissing the stories as misunderstandings and misinterpretations by the press, but she could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. Hania, however, was far less composed. She stormed into one televised interview segment uninvited, trying to defend Rayan, only to be quietly ushered away by the PR team. Clips of her awkward. The interruption went viral, turning her into a social media punchline. Inside the penthouse, she was reportedly furious. "You need to shut this down, Rayan. It's ruining us." She'd been overheard yelling, her voice shrill, but Rayan, consumed by the immediate crisis, barely listened. He called emergency board meetings, hired forensic accountants to prove their innocence, and poured money into calming investors. He didn't realize the leaks were calculated not enough to sink the company outright, but enough to make it wobble. That wobble was all Sana needed. While Rayan fought to steady the ship, she approached the event planners for the annual Zafar Foundation charity Galatha, same event where he had humiliated her months earlier. This year, it was scheduled at an upscale downtown hotel. "I have a better venue," Sana said smoothly during a chance meeting with the head planner of the Zafar Global headquarters. "It'll send a powerful message about corporate transparency and trust." She knew the headquarters ballroom could accommodate more guests, had better media facilities, and most importantly was wired directly into the company's presentation system. Adil handled the rest, ensuring the board approved. The change. By the time Rayan heard about it, the contracts had already been signed. "It'll be good PR," the planner had chirped. "Exactly what you need right now." Reluctantly, Rayan agreed, too distracted by the press storm to fight it. Sana's preparations were meticulous. The seating plan placed key journalists directly across from the main stage, with photographers given unrestricted movement. She personally invited several whistleblower advocacy groups under the guise of promoting ethical business practices. Each guest list was carefully curated to ensure the right people were in the room when the curtain lifted. In the weeks leading up to the event, she orchestrated her public image like a symphony. Paparazzi spotted her meeting with women's empowerment, groups attending cultural exhibitions, and even volunteering at shelters. Every photo showed her poised and radiant, a quiet counterpoint to the corporate scandal swirling around her husband. The night before the gala, Sana stood in her apartment, gazing at the sleek silver briefcase on her dining table. Inside were neatly organized folders, USB drives, and a presentation file, evidence enough to burn Rayan's empire to the ground. She remembered the crushing humiliation she'd felt in that same ballroom months ago, how it had felt to be pushed aside, treated like nothing. Tomorrow, she thought, standing taller, he would learn what nothing really felt like. The Zafar Global headquarters gleamed under the city lights, its glass facade catching the flashes of arriving cameras. Luxury cars rolled up one after another, depositing business tycoons, celebrities, diplomats, and media elites onto the crimson carpet inside. The grand ballroom buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over perfectly arranged tables, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. From the balcony above, Sana could see the whole scene polished, perfect and fake. The same ballroom where her dignity had once been crushed was now dressed as a temple of charity and goodwill. Tonight she would turn it into a courtroom. When she finally descended the staircase, every head turned. Sana wore a deep emerald silk gown that shimmered with each step, the fabric hugging her pregnant form in a way that made her look untouchable, powerful. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and in her right hand she carried the sleek silver briefcase. The photographers instantly began snapping, the clicks echoing like drumbeats across the room. Rayan was mid-conversation with the finance minister when he caught sight of her. His expression froze for a fraction of a second before he forced a smile, as though her presence was a mild inconvenience rather than an omen. Hania, standing just behind him, tightened her grip on his arm, her eyes narrowing at Sana. The program began with dinner, speeches from sponsors, and a few carefully staged charity pledges. Finally, the MC introduced Rayan for his keynote address. He walked up to the stage, the giant LED screens behind him flashing the company logo. Tonight, he began in his smooth, rehearsed tone. We gather not just to celebrate success, but to share it. Zafar Global Holdings has always believed in giving back to the community. A calm but firm voice cut across the microphone system. And yet, Sana said, rising from her seat, "You've taken far more than you've ever given." Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras swiveled. On the LED screens, the logo suddenly vanished, replaced by a spreadsheet. Large black and white figures appeared, detailing offshore transfers to shell companies in Panama, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sana continued, walking toward the stage, heels clicking against the marble floor, "your generous host has been embezzling corporate funds for years. Millions siphoned away while you applauded his charity work." The spreadsheet gave way to scanned contracts, email correspondences, and bank statements. Each one was dated, signed, and irrefutable. "This," she said, gesturing to one highlighted figure, "was taken the same week the company laid off 300 employees. This," she pointed to another, "was funneled through a shell company owned by his mistress, Ms. Hania Malik. Under the guise of consulting fees." The room erupted, reporters shouting questions, guests whispering furiously, flashes blinding the stage. The live broadcast feeds caught every second, beaming it across news networks and social media. Rayan's face drained of color. "Sana, stop this madness." "This isn't madness," she said, her voice steady. "This is the truth you've buried for too long." Hania tried to slip toward the exit, her diamond heels clicking faster, but she didn't make it far. A swarm of reporters cornered her, shoving microphones in her face. "Ms. Malik, can you comment on your involvement in insider trading? Did you use privileged information to profit from stock sales?" She stammered denials, her voice breaking, but the crowd only pressed harder, cameras capturing her panic. On stage, the LED screens now displayed a flowchart mapping Rayan's network of shady deals: foreign arms suppliers, shell corporations, falsified tax documents. Every new slide was another nail in his coffin. Board members seated in the front row began exchanging glances, their expressions shifting from confusion to outrage. One of them, the coup, stood up abruptly. "Rayan," he said loudly, "you've compromised this company's integrity beyond repair. I'm calling for an emergency vote of no confidence." The words hung in the air like a verdict. The other board members rose one by one, distancing themselves from Rayan in full view of the cameras. "This isn't over," Rayan snapped, but the desperation in his voice betrayed him. He tried to reach for the microphone again, but the MC subtly stepped in, signaling for security. Sana, now at the center of the stage, closed the silver briefcase with a soft click. "Oh, it's over," she said, locking eyes with him. "And this time, you don't get to walk away clean." The room thundered with overlapping shouts, press guests, and officials all speaking at once, while the once rival king of Global stood cornered under the blinding lights, exposed before the world. The days following the explosive charity event were a blur of flashing headlines, urgent news broadcasts, and shocked public statements. Sana didn't even have to make another move. The momentum of her reveal carried the rest. Within 48 hours, the Securities and Exchange Commission had filed for immediate investigation into Zafar Global Holdings. The following morning, federal authorities swept into the glass-walled headquarters, armed with warrants. The once polished lobby that had hosted billion-dollar deals now echoed with the heavy footsteps of law enforcement and the click of evidence cameras. Employees were escorted out with boxes of personal belongings, whispering to each other in disbelief. Rayan's office, his fortress of ego, was stripped bare. Investigators pulled hard drives, rifled through file cabinets, and seized secure servers. Reporters crowded the building's steps, shoving microphones toward anyone who looked like they might spill a quote that evening. Rayan was led out of the penthouse he once lorded over, Handcuffs gleamed under the glare of paparazzi flashbulbs. His face, once the symbol of charm and control, was pale and tight. His jaw clenched against the shouting of questions. Did you know your wife was behind the leaks? Is it true you tried to harm her? Was Hania involved in the fraud? The official charges were staggering. Corporate fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, securities manipulation, and attempted harm to his wife. It was the last charge that seemed to hit him hardest, not because he cared about Sana, but because it publicly branded him as the kind of man who would endanger his unborn child. Hania's fall was no less dramatic. As the investigation deepened, her name surfaced in confidential memos and recorded calls, linking her to insider trading and the laundering of illicit funds through her boutique consulting company. The luxury penthouse Rayon had gifted her was seized as an asset. She was spotted days later leaving a budget motel, wearing oversized sunglasses and clutching a single suitcase. Her designer gowns and diamond-studded clutches were gone, auctioned off to cover her mounting legal fees. For a deal, the chaos was opportunity. With Rayon's assets frozen and the board desperate to stabilize the company's reputation, a deal stepped in. His acquisition team quietly negotiated with panicked shareholders, buying up controlling shares for a fraction of their former value. Within a week, Adil Murad was announced as the new controlling partner of Zafar Global Holdings. As for Sana, the courts moved swiftly in light of the overwhelming evidence she'd provided. The divorce was finalized in record time. The settlement she received was staggering, not only from the division of marital assets but also from a legally mandated whistleblower reward. She was now independently wealthy, her financial security beyond question. The media hailed her as the billionaire's wife who fought back. Talk shows debated her strategy, women's magazines featured her transformation, and her name trended across every social platform. But for Sana, the satisfying moment wasn't the headlines or the money. It was sitting in her lawyer's office, pen in hand, signing the final page of her divorce papers. No more Rayan, no more Hania, no more looking over her shoulder. Justice had been served, and she was free. 6 months later, the city skyline shimmered beneath a golden spring sunrise. The chaos of those brutal months had faded into a new rhythm, one filled with softer mornings and purposeful days. Sana lay in a hospital bed, hair tied in a loose braid, cheeks flushed from exhaustion and joy. In her arms, wrapped in a pale pink blanket, was the most perfect little girl she had ever seen. She traced the tiny fingers that curled instinctively around hers. "Welcome to the world, Aliyah," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of awe and protectiveness. Adil stood nearby, holding a vase overflowing with white lilies and blush roses. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. His proud, quiet smile said everything. He had been her rock through every storm, the person who believed in her even when she was too tired to believe in herself. By the time Aliyah was 2 months old, Sana had already moved into her new penthouse, bright, airy, and perched high enough to make the city seem like a miniature model. But she hadn't bought it just for comfort. She bought it for peace of mind. There were no hidden threats here, no locked doors she couldn't open, no shadows lurking in her living room. The idea for her next chapter came to her in the middle of a quiet night, rocking Aliyah back to sleep. She thought about the women she had met during the investigation, women whose powerful husbands or partners had tried to ruin them, silence them, erase them. Not all of them had the resources or connections she had. That was when the Aliyah Foundation was born. Its mission was simple: to protect and empower pregnant women abandoned or targeted by influential abusive partners. The foundation would offer legal aid, safe housing, financial counseling, and when needed, high-level protection. Sana poured her settlement money into it without hesitation. Her first event as founder was modest but impactful: a roundtable of lawyers, activists, and survivors. Within months, the foundation had offices in 3 major cities and a growing list of success stories. Media outlets covered it with the same fascination they had once given to her scandal, but now the narrative had shifted. She was no longer the betrayed wife. She was the woman building an empire of safety. One afternoon, she stood in her new corporate office, a sleek glass-walled space with minimalist furniture and a sprawling view of the skyline. Aliyah, now 6 months old, sat in her arms wearing a soft cream dress and a tiny headband. The flat screen on the wall was tuned to a live news broadcast. The camera panned over a courthouse swarmed with reporters. Rayan was there, thinner now, in an ill-fitting suit, being led into the courtroom for the opening day of his trial. Hania, too, was captured by the cameras, her expression stiff, her designer veneer long since stripped away. Sanar's gaze stayed steady on the screen. He thought I was just his wife. A voice whispered in her mind, the words carrying both quiet fury and satisfaction. But I was always his greatest threat. Aliyah stirred in her arms, making a soft sound that pulled Sanar's focus away from the TV. She smiled and kissed her daughter's forehead. The trial was just noise now, a reminder of a battle already won. Her real work, her real future, was right here. A knock came at the door. Her assistant stepped in, holding a leather-bound portfolio. "The investors are ready for you, Ms. Zafar." Sana nodded, adjusting Aliyah against her shoulder. She walked down the hall toward the boardroom, its long table gleaming under recessed lighting, filled with people who had once overlooked her but now waited to hear her vision. As the glass doors swung open, every head turned toward her. Some, it smiled in welcome, others with curiosity, but all with respect. She didn't hesitate. She walked to the head of the table, placed the portfolio in front of her, and met their eyes one by one. This was her empire now, and she intended to build it on her own terms.